In the past decades, immigration to the EU has skyrocketed. With millions pouring in every year, there seems to be no end in sight. Yet Denmark, the Scandinavian welfare state, seems to have found the solution. Zero asylum, send them back to Syria. Claims should be sorted somewhere else. In any other European country, this will be labeled as far-right and racist, but in Denmark, it has become the political center. Only 1,500 people applied for asylum in Denmark in 2020, a 57% drop from the previous year and the lowest number since the 1990s. In the same year, Sweden recorded 13,000 asylum claims. Denmark, renowned for being polite and progressive, is profoundly skeptical of asylum seekers. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen of the center-left Social Democrats has set a target of 0 people arriving in Denmark outside the UN resettlement system. Yet Denmark was the first to sign and ratify the UN Refugee Convention in 1951 with its core principle of non-refoulement, that refugees should not be returned to a country where they would face serious threats, even at the expense of the country keeping them. Up until 30 years ago, the country was relatively open, with strong protections for asylum seekers and refugees. But that started to change in the 1990s, as the people began feeling the impacts of mass migration, and an anti-immigrant backlash pushed the right-wing Danish People's Party into power. From this immigration crisis, Danes realized that Denmark's success was a result of its homogeneity, and that protecting the welfare state required protecting Danishness. Political figures on the right started saying that refugees should eventually be sent back to their home countries, and the Danish people overwhelmingly supported this.
That people who come to Denmark shall not be permitted to stay in Denmark indefinitely. And second of all, we would like to say to these people who are coming to Denmark that they should not calculate on staying in Denmark at all. We would like to refer these people to countries in the vicinity of the country where they fled. We're not interested in getting a whole lot of people who we're supposed to integrate, but we know as a fact that it is impossible to integrate these.
Originally painted as a far-right rhetoric, it became widely accepted by other parties as it became evident that the Danish people would only support parties that would oppose mass immigration and protect native interests. Europe's influx of refugees in 2015 and 2016 helped turn talking points into law. In 2015, the Danish parliament introduced a new temporary protection status that could be withdrawn when conditions in home countries improve even slightly. This will get rid of many unwanted immigrants seeking asylum on dubious claims, as well as economic migrants who are draining taxpayer coffers. In 2016, the government granted authorities the right to confiscate the jewelry and valuables of new arrivals to fund their stay, alleviating the strain on hard-working Danish taxpayers. The introduction of anti-ghetto laws also sought to limit the number of non-Danish people living in certain neighborhoods, both to ensure the safety of peaceful Danish people and to protect Danish culture. But why does Denmark not have to follow the ridiculous EU policies regarding immigration? Denmark holds opt-outs from European Union policies in relation to police and justice. They were secured under the Edinburgh Agreement in 1992 after a referendum for the ratification of the EU was rejected by Danish voters. These opt-outs were given as a package of measures to assuage concerns raised during that referendum in order to get Denmark to join the EU. As a result, Denmark is not bound by the same commitments as other EU member states, thus rendering certain policy options legally possible in Denmark, which would not be permissible in other EU nations. Even as the number of immigrants pouring into Europe increases, Denmark's main party, the Social Democrats, has adopted an even harsher approach to immigration. While still in opposition in 2018, the party called for a reform of Denmark's asylum system, including creating reception centers outside Europe. They aim for a future where it will not be possible for refugees to obtain asylum in Denmark, protecting Denmark from the spike in crime, among other problems, that neighboring countries like Sweden have. The Social Democrats have been implementing policies to make this a reality since the Danish people elected them in 2019. A new law enabling Denmark to deport asylum seekers outside Europe while applications are being processed, is the latest in the series of measures implemented by the Social Democrats to stop immigrants from flooding into Denmark. Under the new law, which was comfortably passed by Denmark's parliament in a vote of 70 to 24, asylum seekers would be flown to a faraway third country, regardless of where they are from. This move faced heavy criticism by the European Commission, yet enjoyed almost unanimous support from the Danish people, displaying the globalist agendas these multinational organizations hold. Another multinational organization, the United Nations Committee Against Torture, has expressed concerns about Denmark's ambitions to transfer asylum seekers to third countries like Rwanda, citing worries about the safety of migrants. The committee criticized Denmark 2 weeks after the UK Supreme Court said Rwanda could not be considered a safe third country, blocking Britain's similar plans for transferring asylum seekers to Rwanda. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak proceeded to pass an emergency law to declare Rwanda a safe destination for migrants, bypassing these pathetic attempts. The Danish case offers a vivid example of how the will of the people can triumph over the sinister manipulations of the cosmopolitan elites. Denmark demonstrates the beauty of democracy, that it is ultimately up to the people to decide if they want masses of immigrants flooding into their country. And Denmark may preview where the EU is headed as the 27-nation bloc warily watches rising migration numbers while experiencing strong anti-immigration backlash. The globalist organizations such as the Refugee and Migrant Rights Division of Human Rights Watch have labeled Denmark's sensible policies racist, duplicitous, and hypocritical. In a statement, Denmark's Minister of Immigration and Integration claps back, calling the characterization offensive and lacking the seriousness that is required when talking about the government's policies. The government's goal is not zero asylum, he said, but zero people arriving through unofficial channels. Refugees should come to Denmark through the UN resettlement system, where they will be selected on the basis of humanitarian criteria. In the past 3 years, Denmark has been prudent when selecting refugees, extensively vetting them and performing background checks to ensure the safety of native Danes. As a result, Denmark accepted fewer than 250 refugees through the UN resettlement system. The UN Refugee Agency has been critical of Denmark's approach, condemning Denmark for putting its own citizens above refugees from other countries. They state that it was never the intention that refugees were to be subjected to constant reassessments once their protection needs had first been established. Danish authorities are also considering deporting settled refugees back to Syria, as the Damascus area and 2 other regions are safe. This makes these refugees economic migrants and an unnecessary drain of taxpayer dollars. Syrian refugees considered for deportation are housed in open facilities, located in rural locations to keep them away from Danish society. Because Denmark has opted out of many of the EU's immigration and asylum rules, not all its policies are replicable. But the country's hardline policies, its introduction of temporary protection, and its focus on its natives have echoed across the continent. European nations could emulate Denmark's success in handling migration. More than 5 million migrants entered the EU in 2023. This situation is unsustainable, only barely sustained at the expense of the native taxpayers. There must be change. Many policymakers in Europe, like Alexander Dobrindt, a German MP, consider Denmark a model of successful asylum policy. Key to Denmark's efforts to control irregular migration has been the immediate deportation of rejected asylum seekers, contrary to other European countries who let them linger around for months or even years, causing all sorts of troubles for the natives. For example, it is already the case in Germany that those whose asylum applications are rejected are ordered to leave within a short time. However, the problem lies in the country's failure to carry out deportations, blamed on legal and practical hurdles. This led the German government last year to introduce tougher laws aimed at more effective returns. European countries must be able to make a distinction between those fleeing war and persecution who actually need asylum and people migrating for economic reasons. Those 2 groups should not be treated equally. Above all, European countries must place native interests first. Just like the Danes, who have protected their Danishness, European nations must place emphasis on protecting their own cultural identity before it is snuffed out by the waves of immigrants pouring in. Across Europe, countries are struggling to stop immigration numbers from rising, especially with the EU policy severely limiting them. The Danish approach may become the mainstream, and the European people are all for it. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. We invite you to leave a comment below to tell us of your opinion on this matter.